Hello, welcome to the Healthy Alternatives podcast. I am Dr. Christine Sauer with DocChristine.com. Today's show is a recording of my radio show of the same name. Enjoy! Good afternoon, this is Dr. Christine Sauer, your host of the show Healthy Alternatives here on 97.5 CIOE FM with live stream on communityradio.ca every Thursday at 12 noon Atlantic Standard Time. Thanks for tuning in today. In this show, I will talk mostly with guests about all aspects of health, healthcare and wellness, from conventional to alternative and everything in between. My mission for this radio show is to help change people's lives for the better by informing them about different options to get and stay healthy and well so they can choose for themselves which option might work in their case. And if you feel you're stuck in a dark place, I want to tell you, don't give up. There's a light at the end of the tunnel for you too. Today, I'm extremely pleased to be with my friend Bethany Perry. She's a life coach and transforms the lives of people with emotional and physical traumas. Thank you for being on the show, Bethany.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to talk to someone that works in an important area and of transforming lives of the people. Now tell me a little bit about how you got into that area and how you became the person you are now.
Okay, well, that's a good question. It could be a long answer, so I'll try to make it not so long. Quite honestly, I had a stroke, which is really what started this. I had been working as a life coach. I took a neuroscience life coaching course through the Center for Applied Neuroscience, actually here in Halifax. And I was teaching yoga. I was blending those two things together to help people with whatever was going on in their life. And I had a big trauma in my own life. I lost one of my younger brothers. And in his passing, about 8 months later, I had a stroke. I know it was completely from trauma and emotional trauma. And so as I was getting well and working on healing myself from the things I knew about the brain, I started to study a lot about trauma and a lot more about neuroscience. And now I'm dabbling in epigenetics, but blending that to help people understand that when things happen in our life, not only, do we deal with it in our head, but we deal with it in our heart and in our emotions and in our choices for our life.
So true. And in our physical body too, because
Yes.
it all works together and
Yes.
we know that very well. And I work more on the physical biomedical approach to it, and you work more in the emotional
Right.
and mental approach to it. And they are both so important.
They're very important.
Now that really is a fascinating story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
So you're now in Nova Scotia, but you really don't live here. Tell us a little bit about it.
No, well, I lived in Nova Scotia for about 5 years. I moved here in early 2008, I think, and I stayed here for about 5 years. And when my brother passed away is when I moved back to Michigan, which is where I'm from. And I'm here because I needed some R&R, and I absolutely love Nova Scotia and the beaches here, which are everywhere. If you haven't been here, even with the rain, it is such a lovely place.
And it's now no longer raining.
I know.
But rain was very necessary, and I'm very thankful that we got rain here to fill the wells and don't have wildfires like in parts of the States and in
Yes.
Canada, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Let me know a little bit about what you do and what's your favorite thing to do.
Okay, so my favorite thing, I'll answer that part first. My favorite thing to do outside of working with my clients is to be with my family. Number one, my children. I have 5 children and I have 5 grandchildren. And so they are my favorite. No matter what we're doing, it's fun. Also, anything outdoors. I love to garden. I love to kayak. I love to be on or in the water, which is why coming to the ocean is a great place to relax and just enjoy.
Oh, that's wonderful. So were you always a kayaker outdoors person, or?
Always. I would say not always a kayaker. We had canoes when I was young. But yeah, always brought up in the water. My mother was afraid of the water, and my dad was a big swimmer. So I'm one of 5 as well, as having 5 children. So she wanted us to know how to swim. We learned how to swim at a very young age. And
That's good.
Yeah.
Everybody should learn it at a very young age so they're able to not drown because they can't swim.
Yeah, and it's also it's an exercise that you can do forever, pretty much, right? It's not hard on the brain. It's excellent for the body and for the lungs and for breath.
Wonderful. Now, what our listeners probably want to know, how did you notice that you had a stroke? What were your symptoms? Because you are young. You really were even younger then.
Yeah, I was 53, I think. Yes, to be honest, I was extremely fatigued. That's the first thing. I was working and I left. My boss said, what's up with you today? And I'm just like, I'm just really tired. So I thought I'd just go home and go to sleep. And on the way, I was very disoriented. I was lost in an area I should know. And I couldn't even grasp that I was lost. So by the grace of God, my son happened to call me, who is a surgeon. And at the time he was in residency, and he could tell that I was off. So he's like, you must go in and take an aspirin, Mom. I was at a gas station, and I remember saying, I'm holistic. I don't take aspirin. So if somebody ever says that to you, because of course I would take an aspirin, I would offer an aspirin, but I was very disoriented and extreme fatigue. Those were probably my 2 biggest, what I knew.
So it was a clear change in your usual feeling.
Oh, yeah. My whole body felt off. When I finally got to the hospital.
How did you get to the hospital?
I drove myself.
Wow.
I don't recommend, don't do this at home. I drove myself with the guidance of my son.
Good.
And when I got out of the car, it was when I realized, because I couldn't even walk properly. And when I first got into the hospital, I think they thought I was on drugs or something. Because I couldn't, I was seeing things, words were floating. It was pretty bizarre.
So how did they find out? Because they always think somebody's on drugs, but often they have a brain bleed or another kind of stroke.
Well, what happened is, because I'm sure that they thought I was on drugs, and the woman was wheeling me into the waiting room, and she was asking me about medication, and I was like, no, but my jaw is numb. I didn't even go to the dentist. I was just, and as soon as I said that, she's like, your jaw's numb? And I said, yes. And she pulled me back out of the waiting room and immediately took me into the ER, where I lost consciousness there for a while. I don't know how long.
Yeah. So then they did probably a CAT scan or MRI. Yeah. And did you have a bleed, or was it a occluded artery?
It was a bleed.
Quite common. And it's interesting because I've seen so many people that have a bleed and have only what they call constitutional symptoms, maybe a headache, maybe sudden fatigue or disorientation. And then when you say, oh, you have a mental illness or you're on drugs, it's so sad.
It's really sad. And truly, the physician even said, if it weren't for your son, this could be way worse.
And I remember a case, I think here in Nova Scotia, where somebody was in a similar situation, and he was found in the car because he didn't know who to call or what to do.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done if my son would have called.
Wow.
I don't know what would have happened, quite honestly.
Wow. Yeah. So everybody should have really the idea, call 911 first, so at least they can locate you.
And even have it plugged into your phone or emergency contact. Yeah. Most of us can talk to our phones now. And if you can talk to your phone, just emergency contact.
Yeah. Right. And that's so important that you have that, because, as you said, 53 or 52, that's not an age.
No, it's not an age.
Yeah.
It's certainly not
I'm older
an age.
than that. Oops.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah, and so it's important. I mean, even children can have strokes, although it's rare.
It's rare, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Exactly.
Right. So it's really important to look for those signs and symptoms. And I recommend everyone, since that has happened to me, I always have aspirin in my purse. For myself or for someone else.
Yeah.
Just
heart attack, stroke, have aspirin. With the bleed, it's really not helpful, but you don't know what it is.
Right.
And so it is not hurtful, that's for sure, and it can really help. And what I always say is when you have a stroke, it's important that you have somebody that recognizes it and you don't wait too long.
Yes. It's also in the after the stroke, in the therapy and the healing process, is being gentle with yourself, giving yourself time to reorient. And I recommend everyone, like now, read My Stroke of Insight. Learn a little bit, know your brain.
Great book.
Because when you read those things, you may never have a stroke, and that would be wonderful. But for those who have read that, and then should you happen to have a stroke, I was able to use a lot of those things that I learned in that book and do visualizations when I was in the hospital.
Yeah, that is so important. And I think what we should also mention, that everybody that has a sudden change how they feel or behave should have brain imaging done.
Oh, I'm a big believer in brain imaging.
Me too. It often gets neglected. Somebody starts to confabulate and they don't do nothing. They just give them antipsychotics. That is not the right thing to do.
No.
So that's really important. How long did it take you to get back to normal? Because obviously now you're completely normal.
Yeah. My family might not agree with you. I'm kidding. I would say really a full year. I had to work on speech. Speech was mostly affected, gait a little, but speech and my math. I used to be very good at math, and not so much anymore. And the sadness and depression is really common after a stroke. And so having people there that helped support me and helped me walk through some of that. But I think a full year before I really was able to go, okay, it's okay if it's hard for me to figure out 10%, so I can double it so I know how to give someone a tip. Right? In the States, we give a 20% tip. Right?
And I mean, it's amazing. The brain has, even in advanced age, the capacity to restore itself.
It's the brilliance of the brain is phenomenal. The more you study, or at least the more I study, the more fascinating it is. One of the things that I did for my own brain was to visualize new connections. I could feel where it was before they even showed me. I started visualizing healing around it, doing a lot of listening to meditations, all kinds of things. It was quite...
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the end of the first half of the show here on 97.5 CIOE FM Community Radio. Please tune in after the commercial break for more with Bethany Perry. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Healthy Alternatives here on 97.5 CIOE FM or on the web at communityradio.ca. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer, and today I'm very happy to talk to Bethany Perry, life coach and a transformative person in the lives of women and men, especially with emotional eating, emotional and physical trauma. And in the first half, we talked a little bit about how you got healthy after a stroke, which is serious. And tell us now what you do. I know you do a lot about emotional eating. Now, that's a topic that interests me because I always was an emotional eater.
Yeah, so emotional eating, my brother who passed away, which, was a big catapult into blending all that I do and the continuous studies. He was 48 years old and died of a massive heart attack. He struggled with emotional eating himself, and so do I. So I started to read about it, research it, and emotional eating is really the practice of consuming food when we're not hungry. And those times when we think we're hungry, when we want to, we're like, I just walk to the fridge and I go to get something to eat, or I must have. When it's a must-have food, it's usually emotions. And taking a moment to just sit back and look at, I love to use the acronym HALT. Am I hungry? Am I angry? And I would, say / emotional. Am I lonely? Am I tired? Yeah. And really take 5 minutes for yourself to think about which is it. And then serve and honor yourself with what it is.
And so many people don't do that.
No.
They just think about, a chocolate bar would be just right now. And whoops, it's in the mouth.
Yeah. And what we're doing, and the statistics say that about 75% of North Americans are emotional eaters. And I think if you took men out of that study, it would be 100+% for women.
I totally believe that. And it's a big reward when you're a child or at a birthday party, what you get?
Sure.
A cake.
Yeah.
And what's a cake? It's pure carbs, and carbs lights up the cocaine centers.
Right. Right. It's, So, and not only does our society, all societies or many societies focus around food together, but there has not always been an abundance where we can just continuously eat. And then most emotional eaters do the most damage at nighttime. And that's when we might be tired, or we might be feeling lonely, or we might be feeling emotional or stress. Stress is a huge indicator of emotional eating, because what we say to ourselves, what we feel, we want to turn on that parasympathetic nervous system. We think about Thanksgiving, whether it's in Canada or in the States, we eat all this food, and what do we go into a food coma, right? And we blame it on the tryptophan in the turkey, when it's really not that. It might be a little bit, but probably you didn't overeat the turkey. You probably overate everything else.
I agree. You overate the stuffing, maybe?
Yeah.
That's pretty tasty.
Or the mashed potatoes.
Or the dessert.
Or the sweet potatoes.
Pumpkin pie. Yeah.
Yeah, and all those things, there's reasons that, we all have emotions, and life can be not so easy. There can be things that come at us that we don't necessarily know what to do with. And so when we don't know what to do, we stay unconscious and we shove it down with food. It actually ends up causing dis-ease in the body. There's studies that prove when we eat our emotions or our stress, it creates dis-ease in the gastrointestinal system.
Stress, changes the bacteria and causes inflammation.
Yep.
Not good for us.
No, not at all.
So how do we go about it? What can we do?
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize it, because it can be an addiction of sorts. And just recognizing and saying, okay, this is what I'm doing. The first thing is, learn your triggers. What's triggering me? Use the acronym HALT. Take 5 minutes. If you want to eat something and you're not sure if it's emotional eating or true hunger, wait 5 minutes. Women, when they get to a scale of 6 on the 0 to 10 hunger scale, they'll eat anything, because women when they're hungry now, like instant feed me. And so being prepared with food, planning your meals, having things to balance your blood sugar, making sure that it's balanced throughout the day, making good, healthy choices, knowing your brain type, right? This is through the work of Dr. Daniel Amen, understanding what kind of eater you are, so that when you are in a place of either emotional eating or just hunger, how can I make the choices I want to make?
And I love Dr. Amen. He did amazing work with his SPECT scans on actually anatomy, correlating it with the psychological behavior aspects. And I think he was one of the first to ever do that.
I believe he was the first, but that doesn't mean he was. It's just, I studied with him, and I'm an affiliated educational center of his, and his work it continues to be amazing, what he's bringing to people in the health of their lives.
And as I always say, we need the brain to function in all areas of our life.
Yes. And so when we think about it, the world is run by brains, right? Whether we like the brain or not doesn't really matter. We can, just like we care about the health of our body and we exercise, the health of our brain matters. And we don't think about that. Most psychiatrists do not look at the organ they're treating.
Nope, they don't.
It's the only medical doctor that does not, outside of the Amen clinics and some others, but for the most part. And so it's really important to understand that your brain needs nourishment too. And just like anything else, your brain is specific and individual to you.
Yeah, and if your brain doesn't function properly, And there can be many causes for that. You might get irritable, lose out on your relationship, lose otherwise good marriage because of problems with that.
Absolutely.
As a child, you might suffer from ADHD, which I consider more a label than a diagnosis, a symptom. Same for depression, is more a symptom than a diagnosis.
I totally agree. And I think when we understand what it is our brain needs naturally, through foods, maybe through supplementation, but natural supplementation, then the brain starts to work right. Then it's easier to say, okay, what's my trigger? And then stopping the trigger, rearranging it. Byron Katie, I'd love to be able to say these 4 questions, because what we say to ourselves matters.
Yes.
Right? How we talk. Usually we talk to ourselves like we would never allow anyone else to speak to us. So when we want to change our thoughts, to change our patterns, to recognize our triggers, Byron Katie came up with 4 questions, and Dr. Amen uses them. Is it true? Can I know that it's absolutely true? And that's usually when the answer is negative.
Yes.
Who would I be without that thought? And how can I reverse that thought? How can I, turn it around?
Right. Those are important questions.
Very important. I use
For
them
example,
all
many
the time.
people say, oh, it's when they're men and they get upset, it's my wife that nags all the time. Is that really your wife? Or are you a little of the impulsive type?
Yes. Yeah, and that's actually a brain type in Dr. Amen's work, is the impulsive. And you can be compulsive, you can be impulsive compulsive, you can have sad or anxious.
And I love his work too. I followed him for a long time, and he is a great guy. And
he's a wonderful man.
Work. Yeah. Have you met him in person?
I have.
Oh, wonderful. And what are you doing now? Just the eating part, or are you doing more than that?
So I do more. I sort of have 4, I think it's 4 legs to the stool. I am also a health coach. So I use health coaching, teaching people about food, teaching intuitive eating, discovering what works for your body, because we're not all the same.
Right.
That's why studies are confusing.
And the difference between what your intuition tells you to eat and what your emotions may be telling you, that's important to find out.
That's correct. And healing the emotions, bringing healing and resolve, so that a lot of times our feelings, we'll put stories from our mind onto the feelings when really it's a feeling that's coming up, and separating the feeling from the story. That's a big piece of the work that I do, so that we work on them separately. And I usually bring yoga into my work for those who want, even if it's just breathing techniques, not just, they're a big deal. And then a brain assessment, taking a look through standardized testing. What's going on, what a SPECT scan would show.
Very, very important. Yeah, very, very important.
Yeah.
And I tried yoga. For me, it's not the right thing. I do Tai Chi instead.
Yes, and yoga isn't for everyone. You should do what you love.
Exactly.
Whatever that is. Whatever brings you peace and joy, do that.
Yeah, and some exercise, especially when it's outside, like gardening. I love my vegetable garden. And every morning I go see my chickens and sing to them. That's fun.
Yeah, I like to talk to the hummingbirds.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, no, I really am an outdoor girl. I think it's important to be outside.
Many people don't go outside anymore. Either they're scared of the sun, or they're scared of mosquitoes or ticks or whatever. And that's so sad.
Yeah, there are so many ways you can work around that. And so go outside, get that, even if just your face gets vitamin D for 15 minutes a day, your brain will be so much happier, and so will your life.
And just being outside, the sun gives you just a different feeling and an emotion.
Yeah.
The sun is not for nothing revered as a god in certain cultures.
Yeah, because not only does the sun give us vitamin D, which does improve our mood, the sun, just being outside, even if it's gray, because in Nova Scotia it can be gray often, just like in Michigan. Michigan has different but similar weather patterns, and it's still that importance of getting outside and just breathing in the fresh air and letting the body receive nature. Now,
before we wrap up, I would invite you to share how can listeners contact you.
Okay. The best way to contact me is through my website, which is bethanyperry.com. Anyone who's listening, I have a free gift for you. So you can go to my website and you'll find it. If you remember, it's bethanyperry.com/healthy alternatives. So there's a free gift on self-care that you can, or self-love that you can receive. That's the best way to reach out to me, because there's a contact me page as well on the site.
That's wonderful, and I'll share your links obviously in the podcast page.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, Bethany, and that brings me to the end of today's show. And if you have any questions to Bethany, comments or suggestions, or to me, my email here is christine@communityradio.ca, and I'm always grateful for any feedback. I also want to extend a special thank you to today's producer, Seth Glasgow. You might not know this, but this is a volunteer-run non-profit radio station, and we even have an art gallery. If you're local and you'd like to drop in, we're at 11 Glendale Avenue, Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia. Thank you all for listening to Healthy Alternatives. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer. Tune in next Thursday at noon on 97.5 CIOE FM Community Radio with live stream on communityradio.ca for the next episode. Goodbye and have a great day.